Hey, welcome everyone. We will start in around 5 minutes. Feel free to, in the meantime, check out the PDF that I pinned. Hi, Ilaria. How are you? Thank you for coming.
Hello. Can you hear me already?
Yes.
Perfect.
I already put the slides up.
That's perfect. Now I just need to open them on my laptop.
Yeah, we still have 5 minutes, so you're fine. I hope everyone is doing well.
Can you hear me well?
Yes. Yeah, we can hear you well. Thank you. And I will put the link to the paper into the chat, everyone, if you want to check it out again. And I also put in the chat a link to the website where Ilaria is currently working as a postdoc, but I'll make the proper introduction in a few minutes. Feel free to come up on the stage if you have questions, if you want to interact. And we will start shortly. Hi, Kyle. Hi, Ethan.
Hi, Katerina.
Hey,
Hey,
everyone.
Doctor. Seems like a
Thanks
pretty
for
cool
coming.
topic.
Yeah, I agree. It's really interesting.
Thank you. I am happy not to be the only one excited about these things.
We are a scientist self-help group. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, but sometimes, I guess as scientists, sometimes you end up wondering whether you're the only one who actually cares. Because it's like, am I diving too deep into this subject? Or is it still interesting?
Yeah, I agree. I told a friend of mine, if nothing else, we show scientists that somebody else cares.
Yeah,
And maybe
this is
people
actually very
stay.
nice.
Maybe if people stay in science then instead of doing something else. Yeah, we'll start soon, everyone. Thanks for coming. If you think a friend of yours would like to learn about this too, feel free to invite people. And yeah, we'll start soon. I don't know why it didn't work to invite before the other person, but yeah, I'll keep trying. And yeah, welcome everyone. We'll start in a couple of minutes. Feel free to check out the paper link that I shared in the chat, the websites uh, some information about Ilaria, and then also the PDF on top. That will be the slide presentation that is going to be used. So feel free to open it, check it out. In the meantime, we will start in a minute and share the room if you feel like this is something other people would enjoy as well. And yeah, we are very happy to have Yaria here today, talking about this really interesting topic, um, which I only really thought about in history class. In high school, we had the class about how youth came up. So it's really interesting to see your hard science evolution class, like study about this. That's why I really, you know, and enjoyed reading it and invited you, Ilaria. And we can start. Welcome everyone to Science Society, and of course, a special welcome to you, Ilaria Pretelli. We appreciate so much that you came here today. And before we'll start, I'll give a little bit of a background information. Ilaria did her bachelor's degree in biology at University de Studi di Padova with cum laude. And then she did her master's at the same university, also with cum laude. And the thesis title was The Flight of the Bumblebee, Size-Related Differences in Flight Performance and Adaptation to Pesticides-Induced Stress, which is also sounds like a really interesting research. And then she did her PhD at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology at the Department Human Behavior, Ecology and Culture. And about this project that she will present here today. And Ilaria's background is mostly in evolutionary biology, and she is particularly interested in evolution of human traits concerning life history, sociality, and behavior. And she is now a postdoc or a research fellow in the evolutionary anthropology department at the Institute for Advanced Study in Toulouse. So welcome. Thank you so much for coming. And we usually start with a short interview, if that's okay with you. And the first question would be, how did you discover a passion for science, or that you wanted to go into science, become a scientist? Was it something maybe you always wanted to do, or was there something that triggered that interest? Thank you.
Well, first, thank you, Katarina, for inviting me for this. I am very, very happy to be here and to be able to, share my research and scientific interest with the larger public. And thank you for your kind introduction. So, as you said, I am an evolutionary biologist, and this means that I actually came to science in general and to this research in particular from biology. And this is because basically, since when I was a kid, I kind of really liked to look at animals and the way they were behaving. So at some point, my dream was to be an ethologist, and I was reading Conrad Lawrence and thinking, oh, how cool to look at how animals behave and try to understand why they're doing what they're doing. So I think my main interest was looking at animal behavior, and um, and then I also really wanted to travel and see the world and have different experiences about it. And somehow the scientist career puts together a passion for studying behavior and the possibility to actually see it enacted by people all over the planet. And so I did like the idea of living abroad as a scientist, which has, as I believe many people know, the pro and cons. There's always need to move, but also the possibility to learn about life in many other countries. And I had the opportunity to do field work, which was not part of this research that I'm presenting today, but during my PhD, I did 1 year of field work in East Africa, and that was also very rewarding, both scientifically, but especially from the personal side. So I think I have a general interest in behavior and understanding why animals behave in a certain way, and with many of the perks of and an interest for many of the perks of the scientist career itself, like the traveling and the possibility to engage with cool people and to research on subjects that are interesting. And I think, yeah, that's how my interest in science came up.
Wow, that's interesting. So I'm glad that you could follow exactly what you wanted to do. That's wonderful, and I feel like we or people are very lucky that can do that. And then is there maybe for this specific project, is there like a background story, how this project came about and you came, to do the research on this topic? Like, was it easy, to get, I don't know, funding, or was it really hard to do this? Whatever
Mhm.
like insight you can give us. Thank you.
First, the first passage that brought me to this project was to move from studying, to thinking about studying other animals. I did my master on social insects, on bumblebees, to actually deciding to study humans and human behavior. And I was looking at PhD offers, and somehow everything seemed very specific, and I kind of felt the need for something, some wider breadth. And human evolution is, I think, an incredibly interesting subject that still requires a lot of research. And so first I became more interested in human evolution, and I actually got a PhD position. And in there, I decided to study the evolution of childhood. And in deciding so, I got in touch with Shana Levi, who is one of my co-authors on this paper. And Shana, who is at Durham University right now, she's literally a power of science. She's just always coming with new ideas and new projects and new things to do. And so, relatively early in my PhD uh, progress, she suggested that we do a meta-analysis of children foraging return studies, or of a review of studies that include children foraging returns. And so this is how the idea for this project, or the birth of this project, came to be. And then from there, we involved Eric Wingen, who's the stat expert on this project. He's incredibly good, and he's now a data scientist at Zurich University. But by the time we were the three of us, PhD students, learning, or well, Shana had just finished, but Eric and I were still in the middle of our PhDs. So we decided to do a project together and to use the wealth of data that's available in the literature, because we are the three of us interested in life history evolution, and we all worked on foraging returns. And foraging returns are incredibly delicate data. With foraging returns, I mean data that are collected by following people who go hunting or gathering food. So this involves researchers spending time in a foreign place with populations that still rely at least partially on hunting and gathering. And it requires a lot of time, because it requires either following individuals around, or being able to track foraging expeditions that delve into the forest, or that leave camp. And so this data is incredibly costly to be collected, and incredibly precious. And it's also really, really needed, because there are so many hypotheses that involve human evolution, that rely on data on foraging. And there is quite a lot of data on foraging, but it's not super high quality and is definitely not enough. And also to study foraging, we need always to be aware of the differences that there are between populations, between resources, and so we are basically limited by funds and by time and other things, like from collecting the quality of data that we want. But there is data online, there is data in papers that are published, and this data should be used um, to do science. So that's where we started, and we developed a project that was looking at the evolution of childhood with a variety of foraging data from children in the literature.
Well, that's really interesting to learn. Yeah, the background, how the data collection, how precious it is. Um, is it also maybe one of those that we kind of have to hurry up because the environment where people can still have this type of lifestyle is dying out, and we kind of should
This
focus
is
on.
definitely the case,
Yeah.
yes. So, well, historically, even in relatively recent history, hunter-gatherers have been kicked out of their traditional hunting and foraging areas. But even on a slightly longer time depth, hunter-gatherers are not anymore in the most productive areas of the planet. If we look 10,000 years ago, the beginning of farming practices, the whole world was inhabited by hunter-gatherers, and they were practicing all sorts of really complex hunting and gatherings. There were complex societies living out of hunting and gathering, and of course, these people are not around anymore because already for hundreds or even thousands of years they've been displaced by farming communities. And so there is a whole lot of data that is not available because of historical, like deep historical reasons, and there is nothing to do about that apart from trying to interrogate a little bit the archaeological data. But even the last remaining hunter-gatherers are both like either being kicked out of their last remaining areas, which are often desertic or semi-desertic, or the depths of the jungle where it's not really easy to go. And this is happening because like all the fringes of the deserts, often pastoralists have been moved to the savanna areas that are in the fringe of deserts, and then the hunter-gatherers are put into the desert. Or the deep forest, for example, in Congo, has been largely occupied by wood collectors. So hunter-gatherers that used to have pretty uh, let's say pristine, although it's very delicate to talk about what is pristine and what is natural, whatever. But that had a lifestyle that had not changed for many thousands of years, are now working in close contact with the market world and woodcutters. And so, yes, there is a lot of loss in the environment, but there's also other things like the life of a hunter-gatherer is, it has ups and downs, and then there can be, climate change that impacts, or also like just normally, particularly dry years can have an impact on hunter-gatherers communities stronger than on, us who rely on food that comes from all over the world. And so often hunter-gatherers are reached by NGOs, which is good, but also they are becoming often more and more reliant on carbs that are imported. So, for example, in many places, the last large communities of hunter-gatherers in Africa are often also being engaged in tourism, which is also a really good thing because we cannot just complain about people being kicked out of their environments by climate change or human activity and not want them to engage in something else. So, for example, the Hadza in Tanzania, they're often engaged in tourism, so people can go see how they live. And this is a great activity and brings some money to these communities. And then often people buy, complex carbs like or simpler carbs like maize or cassava with this money. So although they're not really changing their lifestyle, they're not becoming farmers, and they're still relying on hunting and gathering for a proportion of their diets are not the same. So I think we have to be careful when we think about hunter-gatherer communities, in the sense that all of these people are modern people living in the modern world, and often they are connected on the internet and they are on Facebook, and they are definitely not relics of the past, but they are often having behaviors that we do not observe as much in modern communities. Although if you think about it with some care, actually almost all societies on Earth do some foraging. Um, for example, berry picking, or you get chestnuts or mushrooms. These are all foraging activities that are almost irrelevant part of our diets, but there is still some foraging going on. We could study this type of foraging sometimes, but it's kind of hard because it's a very sparse behavior. So you try to go to places where people actually do forage at a faster, a more denser rate. They forage more often. So yeah, these are very precious data, and we have, sorry, I'm just stepping one moment back. We do have some really, really beautiful data collected since the 70s and 80s from some of the hunter-gatherer communities, and these data are literally gold. But still, they are from very few communities, so any other data that we can collect on even hunting and gathering from non-strictly hunter-gatherer communities is definitely helpful. So yeah,
Yeah, thank you for that background. And one last question. Um, are hunter and gatherers also more nomadic, or is that not the case? Like, does it, doesn't correlate at all?
So there is obviously a lot of variability, and it's often linked to the environment. But yes, so they're definitely less stable than agricultural communities. But actually, so in anthropology, people often distinguish hunter-gatherers, pastoralists, horticultural, and agricultural communities. And actually, we have data on, like, we know that the only relatively stable lifestyle is the agricultural one, because even horticulturalists, which are cultivating, they plant and they harvest, but they are often practicing what we call the slash and burn agricultural lifestyle, in which they arrive in a new area, they cut and burn a plot, they plant their plants, and then often they move on and they go to some other place, and then they come back just when the plot has ripened and there's actually food on the plot. And we have information on, like, we have data on the existence of these methods in the depth of the Amazon for thousands of years. So yes, hunter-gatherers are mobile, but they're definitely not the only mobile ones. And we actually also know that really early agricultural people behaved like horticulturalists, and often were very, very were nomadic and seasonal in their nomadism, in the sense that they would spend play time where they harvested food when it was needed, and then they would just go away and do something else. Um,
Yeah, thank you. Interesting. I'm thinking immediately how we can protect in the future. None of the modern societies have really room for mobile people. I think, you need to register in a specific place to get healthcare and whatnot. I don't know how we will solve that, but
I mean, many of these nomadism is still like intra country, right? I have a friend who works in Mongolia, and she works on settlement pattern in Mongolia. And lots of people in Mongolia are still nomadic because they live um, of sheep. They're farmers, they're pastoralists, and they're not farmers, they're pastoralists, and they actually, you know, live in yurtas and go all over. And then at some point they stay sometimes in the city, and then they leave again. So I think I think there are a lot of production means that are compatible with a more nomadic lifestyle that are, and also potentially more environmental friendly, and these things that have been practiced for thousands of years. And so, yes, probably, we don't need as much to actively preserve these lifestyles, but rather, leave the possibility of people to choose what they want to do, because you get people from hunter-gatherer communities who are like, well, I'd rather live in a city, goodbye, and other people who would really really like to keep living in their ancestral lands, and keep practicing their ancestral lifestyles, but they are encroached by pastoralists who are then themselves moved away from other areas where maybe they're planting some soya. So it's really, it's really complex systems, and yeah, giving some opportunity to keep doing what your ancestors did. Also in a productive way. It's not about, protecting like the grizzly in the Yellowstone National Park. Is really um, facilitating some production means that are compatible with the lifestyle that you choose. So, for example, tourism in this sense is great for many hunter-gatherer communities.
Yeah, thank you so much. So for everyone, the slides are pinned on top of the room. Please feel free to open the link, and the stage is yours, Ilaria. Thank you.
Okay, now it's up to me to talk about some of this science. So as Katarina introduced me early on, I am an evolutionary scientist. I'm a biologist by formation, and I study humans, and human traits, and how they evolved. And my general area of focus is life history. And what is now life history? So life history is the sequence of events that happen during an organism's lifetime. So if you think of an organism, you think of it, and an organism is born, and then it probably grows and develops until at a certain point it matures and starts reproducing, until at some point they probably grow old and die. And this whole process is interconnected with energy. Energy is needed to grow and develop, but also to reproduce, and to prevent oneself from growing old and die. So think of it as a game. You get, there are turns, and at each turn you get a certain amount of energy, and you can invest it either in growth, maintenance, or reproduction. And if you use one amount of energy to grow larger, then you won't have a baby now. But maybe if you have a baby, then you don't have as much energy for self-preservation, and so on. And because these things trade off one with the other, and you cannot invest the same unit of energy in two different functions, when and how much energy is invested in growth, maintenance, and reproduction is subject to natural selection, and hence there's evolution that involves life history trait. Now, what do I mean with this? So the kind of unit of measure of evolution is fitness. Uh, in proper terms, fitness is the proportion of future generations that descends from a lineage. But for now, and for like roughly speaking, so that we understand each other, we can think about it as the number of surviving offspring that an organism have. Um, and this is the unit under selection. So selection acts to increase the number of offspring that organisms have. And life history traits have a lot of implication for fitness, because if you, for example, if you're an organism, you can decide, and you don't decide, but you can either reproduce now and make, for example, 5 eggs, or you wait another year and you spend this year growing, and then by next year you can make 50 eggs, and then you have higher fitness, a higher number of offspring, and maybe might be favored in certain conditions. Or once you've made an egg, you can actually invest in parental care and protect the egg, or simply move on and then make another egg somewhere else as fast as possible. And all of these things have an impact on how many surviving offspring you will have at the end of your life, and hence which traits will spread in the population, because organisms who make more offspring the traits of organisms that end up making more offspring will diffuse in the population and become prevalent. So in certain environmental conditions, maybe more parental care is favored. Maybe in other situations, eggs are not at risk. So individuals who make more eggs but don't care for them have actually more descendants. And all of these life history traits are connected to the environment, but also to phylogenetic constraints. So some lineages have longer lifespans because of certain initial conditions, and then these things can be carried on. And this creates, along the tree of life, a huge amount of variation. So, for example, on slide 3, I showed two pictures of two different organisms. On the left, we have a huge tree. This is a really large organism. It's an oak that lives in South Carolina. It's called the angel oak, and is estimated to be 3 to 500 years old. So this oak might have been there before Colombo set sail from the Iberic Peninsula. And this is not super unusual for oaks to live several hundred years. And they are also characterized by a late age of first reproduction. So they start making acorns around 20 or 30 years. And they actually can produce a huge amount of acorn during their lifetime, up to 50,000. But we are not, like, the world is not covered in oaks because actually they don't invest much in protecting their acorns, which end up largely eaten by squirrels, and also have relatively low germination rate. So they oaks invest very much in number, but not as much in quality of offspring. But then when an individual grows, it becomes huge and is very and invest a lot in maintenance. On the other hand, we have aphids, which are these green insects that you can see in this picture on the right, but also you often find them on the plants on your balcony or on your garden. And then come summer, they start reproducing like crazy. They are really small insects who have a very interesting life cycle, in the sense that a female can reproduce asexually, so they actually give birth to live offspring. They don't make eggs, and without having sex, without being fertilized. And this makes them incredibly fast at reproducing. So they are very small, they live a very short time, but they can very fast grow on your plant and make your plant not very happy by an excessive number of aphids. But then also they have a problem because they don't invest as much in maintenance, and when winter comes, they usually die by the bunch. And there are just some individuals who are often the product of sexual reproduction, who overwinter and give birth to new specimens the following year. So there is a lot of variability across species. And if we move a little bit closer to humans, we can look at what happens with chimpanzees. Chimpanzees are a bit more like oaks. They live a long time and they take a really long time to mature. But differently from oaks, and also from aphids, they invest a lot in parental care, and they take care of their children for almost a decade. And this means that they end up having a very small number of offspring. So, for example, we know that Flo, who was a chimpanzee in Gombe National Park, where Jane Goodall started studying ape behavior, she was a pretty successful chimpanzee, and she had 5 children. And I think the highest number of offspring that were ever recorded for a chimpanzee in the wild was 7, which is not a big number at all. And this is what we call life history, a slow life history. So a long life, that a delayed age, a very late age of maturity, a small number of offspring. And this is a characteristic type of slow life history. And humans look a little bit the same. We are also large-bodied mammals, so we live a long time. And we are, as part of the primate clade, we are slow. But even within this clade, we are really, really slow. We have other, like some specific traits. We have exceptionally love, and these are listed on slide 4 if you want to go check them out, and also on a paper that where there's the link on slide 4. We live really long lives. We take a really long time to develop. We start reproducing quite late, and we have a really, really long period of dependency from adults, from our parents or our parents. And despite this, we actually managed to have a pretty high fertility for primates. It is not at all unusual for individuals who are trying to maximize the number of offspring or to have as many children as possible to have 10 or more children. And we can do this because we are not waiting for the first child to be out of the house and completely independent before having a second child, as many animals do, but rather we just have multiple dependent offspring at the same time, that are dependent from the same reproductive couple. And these are many like specific traits that are special to humans, and many of these we pivot around a special human period, and this is childhood. So, what is childhood? Childhood is a period of time, and it's defined as the period between weaning, so when individuals stop being breastfed, and adolescence. It is characterized by a slow somatic growth. So children grow much slower than infants or teenagers, and you might have noticed this if you ever had to buy clothes for, a growing human. But there are other things that happen. For example, during this time, the brain grows really, really fast, and it reaches actually adult size much before the body does. And so the brain reaches adult size when individuals are about 10 or 12. And also there are changes in behavior, because even though children are still dependent from adults for provision and protection, they become more adventurous, and they start trying out stuff and behaviors, and sometimes copying adult behavior, sometimes by themselves or in groups, and often start helping in the house, or and especially in food production, which is where we are actually interested in this paper. But it's important to note that this period is unique to humans. For example, chimpanzees tend to move quite seamlessly from being a useless infant to a largely independent young adult. And this trying out period, this period in which the body grows much slower, but the brain is fully grown, this requires some evolutionary explanation. And one of the leading hypotheses is called embodied capital hypothesis. Um, and so this has been proposed by Kaplan and colleagues in 2000, and it takes inspiration from a theory in economics that explains why individuals would forego immediate gains, so in their salary, to spend time and often money to acquire education. So the idea is that the things that you learn will allow you to have higher salary later on, and a total higher lifetime earning. So when you take this theory and you translate it to life history theory, and you substitute money for offspring, what Kaplan and colleagues suggested is that humans tend to postpone reproduction because by learning things, they can actually have more offspring later on. Or more specifically, individuals that spend time becoming better foragers by acquiring somatic and cognitive embodied capital, which is what we call these traits that are acquired during childhood. For example, the knowledge about the environment, or foraging abilities such as spear throwing, or even just becoming stronger and investing in your body. So foragers who do these things will be able to invest more energy, to harvest more energy from the environment when they are adult, and hence maintain a larger number of children, and hence have higher fitness, so that at the end of it, learning and waiting to reproduce is a trait that is favored by natural selection. So they also suggest that there is this process happens because humans learn to exploit in every environment the most energy dense resources. No matter how complicated it is to get food, they always target the best food that is in the environment, the food that is the most productive in there. So they make a connection between niche complexity and the evolution of human life history. So we spend time as children learning about the environment so that we can exploit a very complex niche and maintain many children when we are adults. And this is the hypothesis that we are trying to test in this paper. And it is a very difficult hypothesis to test because we talked about data quality, we did about data availability. We cannot go back in time and actually see what happens. We cannot make experiments on human evolution. And also the traces of behavior in the archaeological record are often really hard to interpret. So many research has been done, like not many, but like some research has been done with an approach that looks at foraging behavior in contemporary hunter-gatherers. So people who still rely on hunting and gathering, and other subsistence populations who still hunt and gather. So for example, there is a really interesting paper that we actually is the basis that we started from to work on our paper, which is also published on Science Advances by Costa et al. It's cited on page 8, and there's also a link if you want to go check it out. This paper tests one of the assumptions of the embedded capital hypothesis, so that learning to forage requires a long time. It's a really simple assumption, but it needs to be tested, and they focus on one specific type of foraging, which is hunting, that is considered particularly difficult because when you hunt, you have to have ecological knowledge to know where the prey go or where to find them and how to recognize the traces and track the prey down. And also you need to have physical abilities to actually accomplish the killing and actually bring food home. So in order to look at the development of foraging proficiency and how this changes during the lifetime, they compiled a really impressive data set. They actually called researchers and asked them to share their data, and they collated a huge sample of 40 studies from tropical areas where the last remaining hunter-gatherer populations are largely residing. As we said before, they've been often pushed into desertic, semi-desertic, or in the depth of the forest areas. But there are also still some hunting-gathering populations in the north. You can see Inuit, for example. These marginalized areas still harbor some hunter-gatherer people. And they have more than 1,800 individual foragers, and for many of them, they have longitudinal data coming from multiple years because of these really incredible data sets that have been collected from the 70s to or 80s to often the 90s or early 2000s. And in total, so there's a lot of variability between sites on the quality of the sites. There's one site that has a huge proportion of the data and others that contribute to just a handful of data points. But it's still really impressive data set with more than 23,000 observations. They also develop a really cool stats in which the model, like the function of a skill with age, is the product of two different functions. There's a growing function and a decreasing function that describe a variation in foraging skill with age. So there's a development side that is called knowledge, and a senescence component that describes the decline of foraging ability with age. And there's a resulting curve, which is called skill, and that grows and then reaches a peak and then declines. And what they do in this paper is they look at when and how this curve peaks and how it's shaped around the peak, and they make inferences about the evolution of life history. And on slide, I think it's 9 or 10, probably 10. There's a plot that shows all of these curves, and they find that the statistically average hunter in this sample reaches peak hunting skill around 33 years of age. But the peak is on average quite flat, and individuals have close to maximum skill from 18 to 56. And across societies, across the 40 societies, the peak is always kind of late, so between 24 and 45 years of age. And this is interpreted as a support for the embodied capital hypothesis because it takes a long time to actually reach your peak foraging skills, and it takes the whole developmental time and some more. Often, foraging hunting skill peaks after peaking strength. And then, so this is encouraging, nice hunting data support the body capital hypothesis. But then there's a whole lot of other data that come from different resources. So we actually found that in collecting shellfish or fruits, children become pretty good collectors pretty early on, and for example, Crichton and colleagues recorded that a couple of Hadza foragers that live in eastern Tanzania collected enough fruits to meet their energy requirements on multiple days, um, which is not exactly what embodied capital hypothesis says. It's like the idea is you need to learn to forage complex things. You cannot forage everything you need really early on. But this data the data come from the baobab fruit season. So the baobab, the big tree, you might not know it, but it produces lots of really fleshy and caloric dense fruits. And then when the baobab is in season, then you can collect, climb a baobab, collect a lot of fruits, and actually have a lot of food. But not only baobabs are not seasonal, but also fruits. Fruits are not enough to maintain a humans, and especially developing one. So there's we need different resources to eat, and there is obviously a lot of variability between the resources in how long it takes to learn to forage them. And indeed, another of the predictions of the embodied capital theories is that more complex resources take longer to learn to be foraged than easier ones. And so we tackled this prediction. We looked especially at this prediction in our paper. And the first thing that we had to do was to try to understand what is the difference between easy resources and complex resources. This is not an easy task, but in a paper I really like, Caroline Schuppli and colleagues list some characteristics that make a foraging niche complex. For example, eating grass is easier than picking fruits because you have to know where and when to find mature fruits, but ripe fruits. But other resources that require extraction, like shellfish or tubers, are even more complicated than fruits. And finally, things that move and need to be hunted down are even more complicated. So we ranked resources in this order with fruits and then shellfish and fish and then tubers and then game. This was our hypothesis. There's a connection between the complexity and the rate at which foraging skill is acquired during the lifetime. And we focused on data up to 20 years, partially because that's how data are structured in the literature, but also because on the early ages up to 20 years is where we expect the differences between complex and resources to emerge. So with this design, we moved on to our foraging data, to our foraging of the data. So we started harvesting data from the internet, and in there we found a bunch of papers that had data on foraging returns of children. We selected all of those that actually had foraging returns for children and teenagers, because many of them talk about foraging, but they don't actually have foraging returns. They might have time allocation, so they might tell how much time a child has spent on foraging, or it might say uh, how many specimens a child has killed during their lifetime. But we actually needed quantitative, detailed data. And so we focused on these papers. And from all of these papers, we extracted the relevant information from either tables or plots. And we extracted data from the plots thanks a very helpful R package that's called MetaDigitalize. And there's a link on slide 13 if you are academically interested in understanding this process to the paper. and which allowed us to click on points and basically get back a measure, the original measure that created the plot. We also included a good amount of data on hunting that was published alongside the Koster et al. Paper that I talked earlier on. Because this Koster et al., like our paper, has an open data policy, and all the data, this good data that they produce, is openly available online. And so what was our data set at the end of it? We had a bit over 700 individuals coming from 28 societies for a total of just under 2,300 data points. And on slide 14, there are our data points, our societies that come from a bit all over the world. And in terms of analysis, we built on the model that was developed for the Koster et al. Paper, which is a hurdle model that accounts for zero and non-zero returns. But starting from there, we developed our own analysis, which needed to be able to deal with the different types of data that were coming from the different sources of papers, because our data was more varied than the one in the Koster et al. So we needed a bit more not post-processing, but post accounting for the differences. And in general, what we wanted to do was to model foraging returns as a function of age, sex, and type of forage resources, so that we could look at how age trends vary across resources. We also included a latent variable for skill, and where skill summarizes basically the ability of foragers to harvest resources. It's a combination of all different embodied capitals that we talked about earlier without delving into distinguishing between them. And skill basically in our model mediates the effect of age and sex on foraging return, and allows us to make some additional inference. So what happens at the end? Our model yielded a series of curves that represent, and you can see this in slide 16, that represent basically the proportion of maximum foraging performance at each age. So all the curves meet at age 20, and they get different shapes before that, depending on how fast the foraging proficiency for that resource is acquired. And on slide 16, there's a darker line for each resource, which is the mean for that resource, and then the other lines are means for each of the different data sets that we use. And now we have these lines, and we need to interpret them. So what we like the way to interpret them is that the lines can be either convex or concave, so they can have upward facing, like an upward curve that we define of diminishing returns, so that actually most of the improvement happens early in life, and then later in life there isn't as much improvement in foraging proficiency. And this is the case for fruits. Most of the improvement in returns is early in life for fruits. We have a slightly intermediate pattern for fish and shellfish, and then we have really concave functions for game and underground storage organs or tubers that show that actually children, for example, up to 10 years of age, really don't improve much in their proficiency for harvesting these resources, and most of the learning and the acquisition of foraging skill is later in life. But we can get this, we did an additional analysis because we can actually get these curves in multiple ways. We can get these curves either because it takes longer to acquire the same amount of skill, or because you need more skill to actually accomplish something. So if you need more skill to accomplish something, like the difference between an average and a low skilled is very high for resources that are not very skill intensive, and whereas an average forager doesn't does really is outcompeted by a good forager. And so we looked at skill intensity, which is a measure of this, is how much foraging depends on skill, and we find that game and tubers require more skill than fruits, so that more game and underground storage organs are much more skill intensive. And so with this, we don't think our findings are exceedingly exciting per se, because we found that more complex resources take longer to acquire. But this is a key assumption of a large hypothesis for the evolution of human life history that needed testing. And so our finding that it takes more time to learn to forage more complex resources, and also that more skill is needed for more complex resources, are results that are consistent with the evolution, with the embodied capital hypothesis. And the fact we could prove this thing was, I think, helpful for the field. But actually, we also like to think on a slightly larger scale, because actually all these things that we talked about, like the fact that we need to learn behavior to engage with the natural environment and extract the resources, um, is is um, is unique to humans. Is particularly characteristic of humans, and is one of the key characteristics that allows us, that make us different from many other species of animals. So the fact that we largely rely on learned behavior rather than innate foraging abilities means we can actually live in many different environments and specialize in the unique characteristics of each of them. And we can do this in very few generations and in very short time, rather than having to go through the process of natural selections to adapt to an environment. And moreover, because we target high quality food in each of these environments, we can actually have a really high fertility rates for a primate. And we know that a lot of the early colonization of the globe, so the spread out of Africa and so on, has probably been demographically driven. So people, like, each generation, they will move a little bit farther off from the previous one. The fact that fertility is important and learning is important and childhood is linked to both of them is fundamental. It means that childhood is fundamental for the expansion of humans on the planet in the last few 10,000 years. And so this is our big picture. But with this, I will thank you for your attention. But I also really need to thank my co-authors that were really key in developing and carrying out this project. And I need to cough. Sorry. And also, of course, my founders, my uh, institution during my PhD, Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, which founded me through the development of this project, and my current institution, which is in Toulouse in France, and is the Institute for Advanced Study. And yeah, again, thank you for your attention, and I am here for your questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for this really wonderful presentation. You described so well, the data sets and the big context. And so, yeah, this was really wonderful. And for everyone, if you have questions, comments, post them in the chat. I know some people already did. And we yeah, and also raise the hand. You people are welcome on the stage, and well, I wait for people to raise the hand or text me or message me. More questions, I'll just ask in the meantime. Questions I had. It's really interesting about the skill intensity and comparing this returns by resource. I that that was really interesting to me. Is there data also regarding like genetics background in the different populations? Um, that would be really interesting if there is,
So I
or
am sure that this data will be really interesting, but there are so many steps between, the actual foraging performance and what is encoded in the genes, that I would so much love to have more individual level data on actually what we call in here embodied capitals. So it would be so very interesting to actually understand what is the role of strength or like physical abilities versus ecological knowledge or other things in different societies with different types of foraging. Um, And all of this is also complicated by the fact that all of these activities are highly cultural, so they are socially learned, so they're very variable across societies. So I we do not have uh, actual genetic data on the connection between gene variants and foraging behavior. And I actually don't think it would be easy to do anything like this, because as we know, the variation across the human population is really high. Like within populations is also often really high. So I don't think there are many genetic variants that we can associate with foraging behavior. And actually, I believe that there are other individual level traits in the phenotype that would be interesting to study, but we still don't have data for those. Um, so coming back to the genetic thing, like there are some specific genetic variants that are associated to some specific forms of foraging. For example, I recall there should be somewhere an island in which people or a specific area where people practice a lot of night fishing because there was a founder effect, and there was a large proportion of the population has some form of color blindness that make them see relatively well in the dark, or these grayscales. So actually, they specialize in one specific form of foraging. But this is really, really specific cases, and I don't think we can associate, large scale data on genomics to forage behavior. But yeah, it's an interesting question.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to welcome Victoria. She's our co-moderator. Thank you for coming, Victoria. Happy to see you. And the other question would be, I don't know if there is, yeah, it would be far out in the future, but maybe some epigenetic data, um, like maybe the stability of foods supply varies a lot, and would be interesting to see if there's maybe a better coping mechanism reflected also in epigenetic data and heredity than populations that are settled for a long time and then have stress factors like food instability or something like that. I would imagine that maybe over the generations there's some kind of resilience built up, and I think it would be really interesting to see that also, especially during childhood. What do you think?
Mhm. I think, yeah, I mean, there's a whole big interconnection between the diet, like the behavior, especially foraging behavior and food procurement behaviors, and the diets that individuals end up having and their metabolism. And I think there are some studies on how metabolic functions in, for example, Hasda are changing in this last decades, because many of this population are actively transitioning diet-wise from more traditionally hunter-gatherer diet to a diet relying on simple cultivated carbs with some addition from hunting and gathering. And so yeah, definitely all of these things are highly interconnected, and we don't know exactly how, starting to rely on simple carbs that are just brought in can impact the metabolism, and how at the end of it, body BMI or these things will vary in hunter-gatherer populations, and how this will affect actually foraging behavior, or how much are the new generations actually going to learn about foraging when it will be maybe more possible to do something else. Um, yeah, I know that at least some camps where the Hazda are living now, people are largely living off um, maize rather than tubers that they used to excavate. They still hunt, they still go on hunting expedition, but a large part of the diet is not anymore given by forage foods, and this obviously has impacts on metabolism, which we know has long-lasting epigenetic effects on on metabolism across generations with maternal effects and so on. So I'm sure there is something interesting going on, and that we should spend more time trying to understand. Um, and it will especially be relevant, I think, for data that we keep collecting on foraging behavior. Although, again, I don't think that, like, I think there are so many downstream causes and factors affecting foraging behavior that that I don't think these upstream genetic causes are very, very relevant for foraging observed behavior. That's I think.
Eh, yeah, thank you. And it sounds like a very interesting field because there's still so much unknown. And um, how about the age, like of hunters and gatherers? Do they live quite long, or is it hard to,
So
as
we know from historical data and also from current hunter-gatherer or like recent hunter-gatherer demographic populations, but also from lots of non-super healthcare followed people that that actually a lot of mortality for humans is typically happens early in childhood. Usually, if a child in a hunter-gatherer population or even agricultural population where healthcare is not prevalent reaches 5 years of age, they will easily reach their 50s, 60s, often 70s or 80s as well. And people often maintain themselves pretty healthy for a relatively long amount of time. So often people in their 60s and 70s are mm, relatively healthy and well off. And then often there's a pretty fast downward slope, and the decline is fast, but it's not early. And you can see in the slide 10 where there is a big sample with different societies. So there are the 40 societies in 40 little squares. In each square there's single curves that are for individuals, and for each society there is a range of ages for which there is data. So the orange section of the curve is where there is data on hunting, and you can see that there are multiple societies in which there's hunting data almost close to 80 years of age. I can see the Aceh number 16, the Agda number 34, the Waurani number 6. They all have, like, the Shimane number 14 and 15. There is hunting data for people who at least claim to be 80, because I mean there's a lot of discussion on age, on defining age for people who do not have birth certificates, but who are obviously old, and they are, like, for many of these people, we actually have birth checks, or like multiple um, censuses at different times, so we actually have a decent idea of how old they are, and yeah, we have data on hunting for people in their like in their 70s. So yeah, like long lifespan is not a feature of modern medicine. Of course, people would not usually get into the 90s, but it's not uncommon to get to 70, and like not uncommon to get to 80s, and definitely not uncommon to get into 70s. Although it's not everybody, and actually most uh, there is a large infant mortality, and this is actually what is driving this average lifespan that you can see for some African countries, or countries where healthcare conditions are really precarious. You see average age span of like 35, 40, 45 years. This is not because everybody dies at 45, it's because there's a lot of child mortality, and this really, really lowers the mean. And once you pass mortality, unless you have an accident, unless something really bad happens, but most people have a normal age development, and they die in their 70s or 80s uh, if something bad doesn't happen.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that's very interesting because probably to make it to that age, they have to stay healthy also in advanced years, which is not really the case in our society. So it would be really interesting if it's like probably it's a mix of lifestyle and then also maybe epigenetics or that are coming from lifestyle because in our populations we have maybe people around their 80s now most of the time, but most people or a lot of people are quite unhealthy and could not survive maybe in their lifestyle environment. So it would be really interesting to look at
Yeah, so
lifestyle.
definitely, like in many cultures where again healthcare is not prevalent, once the body starts to decline and people are really not able to feed themselves, they have relatively short remaining lifespan after this thing. Although I actually went to the field late 2022, and the mother of a friend of mine who is in her early 50s was sick, and she had been sick for several months, and she was taken care by the rest of the community, by her children, and she was in no way fit to feed herself. Uh, but she was in this situation for many months because people around her were taking care of her. And this is a behavior that we know from the archaeological record of old people who had maybe jaw fractures, fractures in their jawbone relatively late in age, and these fractures were at least partially recomposed because someone else was taking care of them and probably feeding them um, processed food. So caring, even for old people, is not a recent thing, but definitely once one is not very autonomous anymore in old age, because of old age, the lifespan is much shorter than it is today. This said, we also know a lot about the effect of diet and behavior and unhealthy behavior um, on early somatic decline, and definitely populations living in a more less processed food, no smoking, or not as much, not much smoking, not much drinking. It's just in some prescribed situations, and they definitely have much lower incidence of some of these diseases that we associate with bad behaviors. So there's a really big health project on a horticulture population in Bolivia that's called Chimane, and they've been monitoring the level of accumulation um, of CLAC, the measure for the risk of sorry, I'm forgetting the specific words in English, but they've been looking at the risk of heart attacks and Chimane of different ages and comparing to American population of the same ages, and it's significantly lower. The accumulation of the occlusion of the arteries around the earth um, almost doesn't happen in people who are maintaining a traditional lifestyle, while people who are more, let's say, westernized, who live maybe closer to villages, to modern villages, or have maybe smoke or do have a different diet, then these people are actually having American-like or much closer to American-like patterns of arterial occlusions. So we do know that there are lots of connections, of course, between behavior and risk of diseases, and definitely it's not just hunter gatherers, right? Like it's we know what the causes of this decline are, and there's lots of populations and lots of diets and lots of things that actually are compatible with a healthy lifestyle, and it's really not that complicated to think about a healthy lifestyle. What is complicated is follow it because we live in the modern world and there are lots of opportunities to fall out from what we know to be healthy, right? Uh, but but definitely it is um, being in the middle of the forest of you know of a savanna doesn't put you in touch with much opportunities for you to have a bad diet. Let's say.
Yeah, I wanted to give Victoria, hey Victoria, the opportunity to ask a little bit. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Katarina. Welcome, Ilaria. I'm happy that I made it. I apologize. I had written down that the room started an hour later than it did. And I was so happy that I was able to catch a little bit of it. So your work is it's just beautiful and exciting, and I hope that um, what you've written will be shared far and wide. And I'm thinking of in fields of education. I work in education. I'm a science and art educator. And through what I've noticed observationally and studying is what you're describing as foraging behavior in children who are able to maybe what we would call have experienced child-led ways of spending their time. That what I see is appears to be something like foraging, and it could be foraging for playmates, or because these are children who don't have to look for their food to survive, but even foraging. It could be foraging for snacks or foraging for a place to go, but um, applying sort of extrapolating this to maybe the teachings of Maria Montessori, and she taught us that children have a cycle of time, that play is a child's work to be respected, and that the cycle of time in any task that we see them doing is helpful if we respect that. So, for example, if a child looks like they're examining a leaf, then it would be wise to let that child have the beginning, middle, and end of that exploration, and not assume that everything they're doing is nonsense, or not leading to some important outcome. And I'm reading in your work something that I'm wondering if you can discuss a bit. I'll read it to you. It's just really beautiful. It's talking about age graded division of labor, and it's in the article. It says you're talking about age graded. I don't want to read the whole paragraph, but through which children may reap direct fitness benefits by exchanging the resources they collect with those more effectively collected by others, and inclusive fitness benefits by helping close kin. And this, to me, from my perspective, because we all bring our own experience, right? And maybe I'm taking meaning that wasn't intended, but to me that speaks to the benefits of mixed age groupings of children, instead of having children only existing in school settings with their peers. And also it speaks to how important it is to have people together, and being in community and learning and teaching each other. So I was curious what you might share about that
So
section
I
there.
have I have a lot to say about this, although not much of it is actually part of my research. A lot of it is just my personal perception, and my personal perception having spent sometimes in company of children. I've worked in summer camps. I spent a lot of time with children during my field work in East Africa, and a lot of what you say is I very much agree. I have one precisation to make on this on the sentence that you cited, in which we talk about fitness, and we are talking about evolutionary fitness, so the proportion of descendants that we leave in the next generations, rather than like well-being. But this said, I also really think that the social aspect of children, and also children productivity is key to children's well-being. I've had my best time going out and maybe collecting some food or some berries. And this is definitely foraging, and this is definitely something that children tend to do with other children in playtime. And even in Africa, I did collect foraging data, and this is a population that is agricultural, has cultivates most of the food that they produce. There's a lot of fishing, but the diet is relatively poor in proteins. So actually, children are often encouraged to go and forage for their proteins or proteins for their family. But this is, this is half play, half work time, right? Like children are encouraged, but it's not required of them. It is a time in which they can get out of the controlling look of their parents. Maybe they live with their older siblings, with their neighbors. They spend time in mixed age groups. They learn from each other, and they also feel helpful for the family. They feel helpful for themselves. They also get, they go hunting, maybe they get a bird, they have a nice snack. But um but this is definitely healthy mental time as well. And I do think that, and actually there are some movements that actually promote foraging activities in children as a helpful activities, as a, it's often berry picking, mushrooming. I remember collecting, where I grew up, there is this sort of wild asparagus that is a vine, but like the tip is like a tiny asparagus, and we will go and harvest that and bring it home and have, scrambled eggs with those is delicious. And then, like the whole family shares it, but you collected it, and it's nice. um so yeah, I completely agree with you.
Yeah, this is what you'd mentioned. It's the idea that play or time spent that appears to be unconstructed or is not necessarily undirected or not it doesn't that children's time that it is beneficial and so I understand the difference between this genetic fitness that we're using and well-being, but one does lead to the other. um, and so it's exactly that this work that you've done really speaks to that. And as so I was a homeschooling parent and also have led lots of homeschooling groups. And one of the things that I see children really love to do that goes in alignment with this with the foraging behavior, it's just so fascinating to me to to read that this is what your work is about, this behavior. And if the behavior of foraging, maybe it's like when a dog looks like it's sniffing over here and then it sees something and sniffs over there, but it's learning and gathering information, and maybe compare that with gathering food. um, those that oh my goodness, I got off on a tangent. Excuse me. I'm trying to I had a point I was wanting to share with you about that. It's excuse me for being overzealous about your work, but it's so darn exciting. Oh yes, that it's also from my perspective as a homeschooling parent with children, or a group of having responsibility for a group of children in a wild setting, it's a safety feature to have them be able to recognize edible plants, for example, and toxic, right? And so one of the first things I would do is a safety, show them this is edible, we can eat this, we can eat this, we can't eat that. And that's always something that they really want to know, because I'm thinking it's fun, it's in engaging them with their environment, which we all come from, whether we grow up in an urban environment or not. We are of nature, and I believe that innately we know it, and we're attracted to that relationship. So it's naturally really fun for kids and feels is really empowering to them to be able to have that responsibility of knowing I can eat this and I can't eat that, and eating is survival. So again, it comes back to your research, why it's so important, and I hope that it does reach a lot of ears who are maybe outside of those it was intended for.
Well, thank you very much. I am really happy that my research, like our research, because again, this is very much a collaborative effort. And actually, on these themes, I think my co-author Shana Levi, she's amazing, and she really works much more closely on children learning and the relation between learning and the foraging. So if you want, to have another conversation on these subjects, I'm sure she will definitely be a person for you to speak with. But for us, I think for any researcher to realize that the research that they do can be inspirational for people outside the small field area is definitely rewarding. So thank you very much. So there's a
Yeah,
question in the chat by Nemanu, and the answer for why my data does not include India and China, which are definitely a large portion of the population. The answer is that these data are currently not available. There are lots of research that starts to be done in China and is more widely shared with the rest of the world. But as far as I know, China does not have hunter-gatherer populations. There is one long-lasting hunter-gatherer population on the Andaman Islands in India. There are no foraging data that I know of coming from this population. Uh, Still, the point is we are talking about foraging data, so data about hunting and gathering, and most in India and China are agricultural populations since the dawn of, not, I mean, I'm gonna say the dawn of time, but in the sense that they've been in the independent centers for the acquisition of agriculture. So we do not have data from India and China for two reasons. One, because it's kind of complicated to get data from there because of permits and so on. And they do, like, there's a lot of research, especially in China, but it's largely published in Chinese. So I unfortunately don't speak Chinese, so I don't have access to this thing. But the other aspect is that we are not looking at a representative sample of the current world population. We are looking at as much variability as possible from a ancient, largely abandoned lifestyle that is not much present in this country. I hope this helps.
I lost audio for a second. Katarina, could you hear Ilaria, what she was saying? Just
yeah, yeah, I
okay,
could.
good. Good. It's important. I wanted to make sure it wasn't only me. Also, thank you for answering Namanu's question. It's wonderful to recognize the the earth, the whole world, and so many spaces are really, um, you know, maybe white European centering spaces, and there is much research that does ignore populations
So
that are here, but
I
that's not what you're doing. And so
yeah.
I'm just,
Yeah,
I'm
I do think
appreciating.
that like our field is very sensitive to this subject because especially we're kind of bordering with evolutionary psychology, and lots of especially older evolutionary psychology is focusing on Western samples of largely university students, whereas evolutionary anthropology has the research of diversity as a key core concept. Actually has sometimes to fight in the other direction and think that there might be some general features of humanity that don't depend just on different between cultures. So I'm very sensitive to this, and I'm happy to engage in conversation on the subject with participants who are interested.
Yeah, thank you so much for asking the question and for answering it. Because yeah, it's really important to make that clear and to give the reasoning. So I'm glad that the question was asked and that you answered it, and that yeah, that I guess we keep an eye out on this. It's probably very different for like health, population data, and so on. There's still like not enough diversity and inclusion.
And if you want me to answer also Mohammad, who talked about puberty and maturity and readiness to be independent and start families, I can just say a word on that. And especially, actually, we have kind of this belief that when people were reached puberty, they will start their families. Actually, we know from ethnographic and often also archaeological and historical record that this is really not the case, and that for women across hunter-gatherer, across small-scale societies, let's say, often the age of first reproduction is not before 20 years of age, which is few years um, after puberty, and that for males often the age of first reproduction is quite later, and it can vary widely across societies, especially for males. So there's actually a lot that we should think about when we think about the past, and especially like one of the key elements is variation, often connected to ecology, in the sense that more richer ecologies can provide more food, and then people start families earlier. But then also culture and other aspects that can have really big effect on the age at which humans start reproducing.
Thank you. If I might just add a side comment to that, in the same vein as I was mentioning before about the importance of your work, that this question of puberty or readiness to be independent and start families, your and with your partner, the research is demonstrating the importance and the legitimacy, the value of the activities of childhood. And I think that in our cultures we have we need to protect children against child labor, for example, but child labor mustn't be confused with the possibility for children to contribute to their families in ways that are appropriate for their ages, as you've discussed in this work. So I think that the ways that we live might tend to ameliorate the not ameliorate, but well, yeah, but maybe blur the importance and value of child work, because you could have a child sitting with you and helping you with most household tasks, but there's a difference between that and abuse of child labor. But it's important and even enjoyable for children to know that they're contributing to work that they'll continue in adulthood. So I think just as a little side note to Mohammed's question, that things that we see as maybe rites of passage that have been separated because of the ways that we live now, or we live in maybe the cultures of people who are present in this room, maybe those don't really define a life and all that a life is capable of. So it's an interesting question in that aspect as well. So thank you.
Yeah, you couldn't see me, but I was nodding here, and I completely agree. And not only that, I think that by preventing children to contribute to family tasks, we're not only depriving them of the possibility of actually learning to do things before they have to do them, but we're also depriving them from, by taking off responsibility from them, we take them from the sense of life, right? Like we take them off the possibility of feeling helpful, feeling useful, feeling valuable. So I am 100% in agreement with you. And on this subject, and it has almost nothing to do, but apart from this subject, there is a really nice half self-help book I read a few years ago, called Hunting Gathering Parenting. No, Hunt Gather Parent, which I did quite enjoy reading, and that talks a lot about how to engage in better relationships with your children and making them feel part of a unit, which is what actually we all want, including us as children. We want to be part of our family. So if you guys want to check that out, that was fun.
Thank you. Thank you. I wrote it. I put that in the chat. I'm going to look that up, and I'm also extrapolating that to people of all ages, to elderly people. I've been spending time with my father-in-law, and he's 91. And I'm noticing, even though he's not able to, he was an engineer and able to fix anything, and actually taught me how to fix, or feel like I could fix anything too in a house. And something that I find challenging is how to help him find tasks that he can feel useful at. You know, how he can actually safely fix a thing. Because of the way that we live, again, it's difficult to just find things like that, that are, you know, that you can use, where you can use your hands and your mind, and be you know, feel needed and achieve success in something. So it's challenging for the very young, and for the elderly as well, to still um, remain connected in this way that you and your partner have discussed through foraging. And I'm curious, how did you arrive at this research, at this topic of research? And forgive me if you've already discussed this before I got here.
Yeah, I mean, I can always repeat myself. I do like the sound of my own voice when it's not recorded, so so I can keep speaking. Yeah, as Katarina introduced me in the beginning of the talk, I'm an evolution biologist, and I am interested in human behavior, and I am interested in the evolution of life histories, of how behavior basically changes during the lifetime, and how this evolved. And then, you know, like, you engage with one specific subject of research, and then things move a little bit further. And then I did my PhD on the evolution of childhood, and this brought me to East Africa to do fieldwork. And in there I actually spend more and more time with children and parents um, in a relaxed environment, right, in which you actually see their families carrying out their daily life. And I am actually really now very interested in looking at this age-graded division of labor. So this is what I would like to keep working on right now, if that makes sense.
Oh, we can't hear Victoria. Yeah, I think this is such an interesting discussion, and I love the dimension that Victoria brought in. That's why I like these type of clubhouse talks, discussions so much, because we have people from different backgrounds bringing like completely different levels of the discussions. And I wanted to check in with you, Ilaria. We've been talking for an hour and a half. I wanted to give you the opportunity to have dinner and, and do something else. Um, but this was really wonderful, and maybe but that, but at some point you would, you know, come back and share with us updates of your work, because I think it's really interesting, and I think I enjoyed the discussion very much. So thank you.
I will be very happy to bring more data, especially when I do actually get data on children contribution to family, to household work, you know, at the household level. Because it seems like Victoria is really into that. So I will be happy to come back at some point in the future, definitely. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I had fun. I had fun having this conversation and presenting my work very much. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I also like hearing that you enjoyed it too. That's very important. So yeah, well, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and
And
thank
thank
you
you to the
everyone.
audience as well.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for coming, asking questions, and leaving comments, and just being here. It's always wonderful to have these discussions. So, yeah, if you like discussions like this, follow the club. We'll have tomorrow Dr. Talbot coming. Uh, he's in Canada researcher talking about the nociceptor neurons, and actually how they also perform immunosurveillance. So pain receptors, and how pain receptors are kind of intertwined with the immune system. So that's really interesting. It's kind of a new field of research. So if you think that's interesting, join us again. Thank you, Ilaria, and I hope we'll speak again sometime and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here. Sorry about the call. Oh, bye. All right. Thank you, friends, for being here. Thank you, Katarina. See you next time.
Thank you, Victoria. It was a great discussion. Wonderful. Okay, I close the room in 3, 2, 1. Bye, everyone. Thank you.